The QAnon conspiracy theory is all about the U.S. government, supposedly pitting Donald Trump against the so-called deep state. So why is it suddenly spreading in Europe, and particularly in Germany? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mohammed Jamjoom. Its theories have been repeatedly debunked, yet the conspiracy movement known as QAnon continues to thrive. What began in the U.S. 3 years ago is now growing rapidly in other parts of the world. Surprisingly, some of the fastest growth is in non-English speaking countries such as Germany. And the coronavirus pandemic appears to be one of the things pushing this growth. So what exactly is QAnon, and how did it start? QAnon says President Donald Trump is saving the world from an elite cult of Satan-worshipping pedophiles made up of Democratic politicians, billionaires, and Hollywood celebrities. Supporters spread a wide range of unfounded conspiracy theories and anti-Semitic beliefs to predict what they call a Great Awakening. That's when a wider audience will supposedly embrace their theories, leading to a storm when the alleged child abusers face justice. QAnon started in the U.S. in October 2017 with an anonymous post on the 4chan platform. The user calls him or herself Q, a reference to the high-level U.S. security clearance he supposedly holds. QAnon's roots lie in Pizzagate, a 2016 conspiracy theory that alleged leading Democratic Party politicians were running a child sex ring from a pizza shop in Washington, D.C. All right, let's bring in our guests in Brussels. Sergey Lagodinsky is a member of the European Parliament, where he is part of the Alliance 90 group. Also in Berlin, Caroline Sinders. She's a visiting researcher at the Weizenbaum Institute and a fellow at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. And in Athens, Ulrich Brueckner. He's a political analyst and a professor at Stanford University's Berlin campus. Welcome to the show. Sergey, let me start with you. QAnon has been described as, at first, a distinctly American phenomenon. Just how much has it spread beyond the U.S., and how big is the problem in Europe right now?
Well, QAnon is part of a larger movement in Europe and especially in Germany, and a movement of conspiracy theories of all various shadings. We just recently had a demonstration against the COVID measures, and a lot of those people demonstrating there in front of the Brandenburg Gate, a very symbolic place, were those who at least sympathize with QAnon theories. I wouldn't say that QAnon is the leading conspiracy theory in Germany. We have many others. We have the so-called Reichsbürger, the citizens of the Reich, whereas Reich doesn't necessarily mean the Nazi Reich. Those are the people who don't recognize the German Federal Republic as a sovereign functioning country, and who still say that our country is still occupied and we don't have a constitution, for example, which would be functioning. So there is an amalgam of various shadings of conspiracy theories who have come up now, especially during the COVID crisis, but had been there before as well.
Ulrich, to pick up on some of what Sergey was describing, QAnon is often described as a conspiracy theory, but really it's more of a wide-ranging network of conspiracy theories, correct?
Correct. I wouldn't give it too much weight, and I totally agree with what Sergey just said, that it's not one coherent phenomenon, and I also don't think that it is the main one or something that is more powerful in Germany. I think what they do differently from right-wing populist movements that we saw picking up on the influx of migrants in 2015 is that they don't need a particular situation that they exploit and play with people's fears, but they satisfy a general hunger or appetite in scandalizing things or expressing anger or mobilizing a certain interest in something which is not just mainstream politics. And weirdos have always been around, but now it's possible to connect through the internet, or to gather in prominent places, what Sergey just said, in front of politically prominent spots like the Brandenburg Gate or the Reichstag, and then they get the public attention like we now give them public attention by discussing them on television.
Caroline, how is it that QAnon was able to jump as quickly and as dramatically from the virtual world to the real world?
Well, I think as my esteemed co-panelists have highlighted, some of this deals with fear. So, recently in August, The Atlantic covered how really influential mom influencers on Instagram, so mothers who are becoming social media influencers and sort of using this platform, posting a lot of pastel hues, things that we would see as much more like mainstream aesthetics that have this sort of softness to them, that they've been using Save the Children hashtag, a hashtag that is popularized also by QAnon. So what QAnon is doing is really playing upon, I would say, very commonplace fears. And they're this sort of nebulous network, right, of a bunch of different talking points, one of those being something like Save the Children. And Save the Children is something that, is a bit perhaps more palpable to certain members of varying populations, right? Because it's misconstruing facts and building on conspiracy theories around human and child trafficking, but it's packaged in this way that sort of instills fear, even in, one could argue, more like middle class or mainstream audiences, because it's dealing with things related to children. So I think they are finding entry points into commonplace fears, using that as a place to sort of misconstrue and then create, misinformation and disinformation within that.
Sergey, I saw you nodding quite a bit to what Carolyn was saying there. Did you want to add to the point she was making?
Well, I think we're living in interesting times historically. I mean, when there is this combination of irrationality, disbelief, and basically rejection of scientific truth as it is, but also this game with sexual and over-sexualized elites, as they are portrayed by many, but also in conjunction with protection of children, what Caroline was saying. And, you don't have to be a conspiracy theorist to use and abuse this topic. We saw this, that many authoritarians in the world use it. Look at what had been happening in Russia when the laws against homosexual adoption of children were there. So it triggers a lot of instincts and protective instincts of masses and of human beings. So I think that this gets and comes together in this weird theory. And the question is, of course, why people believe it. What happens to human beings in situations of crisis, uncertainty, fear, in historical moments like we're living through now, and what have we done wrong so that those people, are basically victims of their own fantasy.
Ulrich, people in Germany who promote Nazi propaganda can be jailed, but when it comes to conspiracy theories, they're not really illegal unless they veer into hate speech. So how tough does that fact make it for authorities in Germany trying to fight QAnon?
Well, it's not only that we have to look at it from the perspective what exactly of this theory, or however you want to call it, is illegal or not. This is an open society that is strongly committed to freedom rights, which also includes the freedom of speech. And I would always fight for someone's right to express nonsense. And as long as the nonsense doesn't hurt anyone or doesn't cross the line of becoming a criminal matter, like hate speech, I would always support a society that allows to express nonsense. And I guess a lot of what people think there is not thought through and highly political, but it's an expression of, I feel the same as others, like what we just heard about the moms who worry about the future of their children. And it's a general feeling of uneasiness with complexity, but I also don't think that it's a totally new phenomenon. It's just like police violence. This is not a new situation in the US. The only new thing is now it is filmed. In the past, it wasn't filmed, but it was still there. When I was a student, I learned from sociology professors that about a third of Germans are open to authoritarian thinking. And now it becomes visual and it expresses itself in social media and chat rooms. This is the new phenomenon, but not the way of thinking as such.
Caroline, one of the things that's really propagated by QAnon are these virulent anti-Semitic tropes, some of them bearing striking resemblance to anti-Semitic tropes that are centuries old. Why do you think these anti-Semitic tropes are such a prominent part of QAnon?
That's such a good question. I think a lot of it does go back to fears and conspiracy spaces. You know, as you just pointed out, that anti-Semitic tropes are centuries old. It is a classic form of hate speech. It is also, one could say, or arguably a bias that has withstood, sadly, centuries of thought. I think it's an easy sort of entry point, but it is, at least also in the U.S., it is a lot of it is a basis in conspiracy theories and into like well-known conspiracy theories. So as you start to dive deeper into explorations, sadly around the deep state, there are conspiracy theories around Jewish people within that. They're wrong, but they are biased. And there's one thing I would like to bring up sort of within that as we talk about these sort of century-old, you know, very awful beliefs that people are holding on to. Whitney Phillips and Ryan Milner, two authors and professors who talk about mimetic culture, they've written about QAnon, and one thing that they've described is something that they call deep mimetic frames. And a deep mimetic frame is a framework where someone like believes almost in their bones that something is true. It is an emotional belief. It is something that logic cannot confront. And I think when we are unpacking things like QAnon or things like a deeper form of bias, people are holding on to these deep mimetic frames, and then they are finding content and information online that reflects that way of thinking. And that is what QAnon does effectively.
Sergey, in which other countries are we seeing QAnon start to take root and spread more?
Well, it's very difficult to say. You know, I'm not a researcher. I'm a politician now, and I only see a lot of concern coming from my colleagues from other countries. We are here in the Parliament, you know, sitting here in the European Parliament, and QAnon and other irrational theories and fantasies are widespread in many countries, and it becomes a political problem as soon as we have to face informational campaigns and conduct informational campaigns about COVID, for example. So we are now talking here about, there is a special committee which was founded in the European Parliament on disinformation. It has, of course, a geopolitical component, you know, facing the intervention by other countries like Russia or Turkey, for that matter, or China. But it also has this component, and something that Ulrich also mentioned, you know, how do we balance out the freedom and the liberty space in terms of, you know, letting people believe their nonsense on the one hand, and on the other hand, you know, trying to prevent externalities to the society that result from that nonsense, but can be potentially deadly. You know, and we can look at to the White House to see some statements that go in that direction. But just generally, I think it is important to understand, and, you know, following on what Caroline said, this is, you know, I did research on anti-Semitism when I was still a researcher, and I think this is similar to anti-Semitism in that in very complicated times, people are looking for very easy answers and try to kind of make sense out of things that don't make sense out there. You know, our world is so disorienting for many, and now that the structure in international relations and in democracies is kind of falling apart in many cases, people are trying to explain what is happening, and it's always very easy to imagine a kind of a dark force that does control everything, and where it gives sense and gives meaning to what is going on, and can be, people of Jewish origin, or it can be people like a sect, like a cult that are being ascribed to this. So I think a lot of this has something to do with this complexity of the problems that we're facing, and with people longing for easy answers and trying to ascribe the problems to one source.
Ulrich, you heard Sergey there mention COVID-19 and misinformation. And I want to ask you, from your vantage point, how much has the coronavirus pandemic been a catalyst for the growth of QAnon in different countries?
Well, it certainly helped to mobilize people who express their frustration, their anger, their isolation, and channel it in something which, in their understanding, is an alternative to mainstream that is confusing, because if it's based on science, and then science shows that it changes the position from one week to the next. We have a very prominent scientist in Germany who allows people to follow his way of thinking. And this is never about, and now I found the truth, but the truth is an ongoing search. And that is what people find confusing. And if someone else comes and say, don't trust the elite, don't trust scientists, look at them, they don't even know what they thought last week, and now they think something else. This is so much in flux and so confusing that someone who pretends to know better and ignores institution and dismantles the basis of Western-type democratic systems, and rather believes that I speak on behalf of the people and we don't need institutions, and this is my understanding of a majority-based democracy, then this is so much easier to follow. And then it's not about the content, it's more about the wish to believe that I understand the world better.
Caroline, last week, Facebook said that it's going to ban groups that openly support QAnon, but there have been efforts by Facebook, by Twitter, by other social media platforms in the past to try to get a handle on this situation that were not very effective. So will this new initiative, from your perspective, make an impact, or is it already too late?
I guess the answer is a complicated one because it's a bit of yes and no. It is a little late, but I wouldn't argue that it's too late. Deplatforming different groups has shown to be extremely helpful, especially if we go back in time about 4 years and look at the American alt-right. And some of the steps have been taken, at least in the United States, of deplatforming more well-known neo-Nazis, for example. It definitely affects traffic. It drives down traffic. It makes it harder to have, so when Facebook and Twitter enact these policies, it makes it much more difficult for individual members to exist on what we call the clear net, so like the more clear mainstream internet. If groups are having to, Cloudflare, an internet service provider, if they are also delisting or deplatforming different information, then these websites, these areas, they have to go into different spaces. They have to potentially go onto Tor. And that's much harder to find. It's much more harder to organize. So deplatforming is always, I think, a great thing groups should engage in. It is a little late, I would say, for Facebook. It'll be interesting to see how they tackle or handle QAnon posts and groups in languages that are not written in English. So Jillian York of the EFF, Dia Kali of Witness, and a lot of other really great researchers in civil society have pointed out that other languages often get neglected in these measures on major platforms. So we will need to sort of see, specifically in German and in other languages, how this is how this content actually is being taken down. I think what is something to watch is things that are not explicitly QAnon, but have the hallmarks of QAnon thought. So perhaps not using direct QAnon hashtags, but engaging in topics. And then across different languages, are those then taken down? I've noticed just from my purview a rise in very dangerous memes that are sort of conflating Bill Gates as a perpetrator behind COVID, similar to what we saw with George Soros a while ago. But I've been seeing these in Croatian. I've been seeing anti-mask wearing memes also in Croatian. So it'll be interesting to see, and I've been seeing these things on Instagram and Facebook. So it will be very interesting to see how this stance Facebook has if it is actually replicated at scale or enacted at scale across different languages, especially if we're focusing, right now on Europe and the EU. So that's something, we'll just have to sadly wait and see how effective it is. But generally, these measures are more effective than not enacting them.
Sergey, hatefulness has been apparent in QAnon-related posts long before now. From your perspective, do you think it's taken, Facebook, Twitter, other social media platforms too long to try to get a handle on this?
Look, I'm a proponent of a kind of a liberal democracy and open society. I understand how difficult it is to tackle a problem like that in a society which is free. What sense would this make to start, to ban QAnon, which I think is right, what the Facebook was doing. But we have plenty of other theories which are just as harmful. I mean, look at I think that in Germany, the much more prevalent conspiracy theory is the one ascribing to Bill Gates the powers of the dark force. People are talking about him trying to chip human beings, making women not getting children, etc., etc. It's linked to the vaccination practices, etc., etc. This is very widespread, and I dare to say it's probably in Germany, at least from what I see, is more widespread than that. Well, what are we going to do with that? Because everyone has this is the problem with theories like those. They can be framed as criticism of elites. In fact, this is what they are. It might be a sick criticism of elites. But who is going to make the distinctions between what is healthy and what is not healthy anymore? So I think we as democracies are in a very challenging position now, how to tackle those hateful theories and fantasies like they are. In Germany, we have a ban on hate, but it has a very clear limits and boundaries on when you can ban something. And I think this is the right way to go. We need to work here with education. We need to work here with tackling people's problems and maybe talking to people more and explaining to them what I mentioned before, the complexities of this historical moment, and trying to take away the fear and uncertainty. And by the way, the role of leadership is instrumental. Someone like Merkel can do it very well. Someone like Mr. Trump is only harmful on that respect.
Ulrich, we don't have much time left. I want to ask you one last question. I want to circle back to a point that you were making earlier in the show and focus for a moment on some very vulnerable populations in the world right now and how all this is impacting them. How much is QAnon a threat to minorities and migrants?
Well, it is a very big threat to minorities because, in essence, this populist strategy to gain attention by playing with people's fear is, in essence, majoritarian. It defines an us versus them, and the them is always the minority to look down on. If I feel miserable, I find someone who is even in a lower social position, and that creates a different form of tolerance or intolerance to allow, in certain cases, even physical violence, because it is okay if a larger group of people legitimizes it. And that is the beginning of something that is more than words. It is legitimizing violence against minorities.
All right, we have run out of time, so we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks so much to all our guests, Sergey Lagodinsky, Caroline Sinders, and Ulrich Brueckner. And thank you, too, for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Mohammed Jamjoom, and the whole team here, bye for now.